So this is Unit 1, Lesson 8, solving a linear system by using the elimination method. I'm going to show you the specific steps you should follow to solve this linear system using elimination. Okay, so the first thing you must make sure you have is your two equations, and these two equations should be stacked. Okay, one on top of the other. You have to line up the equations, the x's over the x, the y over the y, and the equal sign over the equal sign, and whatever numbers you have on the right have to be stacked on top of each other. So that's the first thing. So step one, we stack. Okay. Step two, now we have to choose whether we add the two equations or we subtract the two equations to eliminate the variable. So elimination means we have to eliminate one of these variables. We have to eliminate either the x's or the y's. Now you can see if I subtracted, well, 10x minus 8x, I can't eliminate the x's. There will still be 2x remaining. 4y and 2y, I can't add or subtract those either. There will still be some y's remaining. So to do an addition or subtraction, you have to make sure the coefficient of the variables are the same, okay, in each equation, so whichever variable you choose. If I choose x, I have to make sure the coefficients are the same. Or if I choose the y's, I have to make sure the coefficients are the same. Now, to make them the same, you're going to have to multiply one of the equations, okay? So if I look at the y's, for example, I can see that, well, 4 and 2, 4 is a multiple of 2. So if I multiply this 2y by a 2, I can get 4y. So I think I have to multiply the second equation here by 2, okay? So let's call this equation 1 and equation 2. So step 2 involves adding or subtracting both equations, but before you do that, make sure the variable you want to eliminate has the same coefficients. Okay, so to make them the same, multiply one of the equations. We did some of this work in our Desmos activity. Okay, so for this equation number 2, so we're going to say here multiply equation 2 by 2. So what do we get? Well, 8x. So here's my second equation. 8x times 2 is 16x. Then I have minus 2y. What times 2 is 4y, so minus 4y equals 7 times 2 is 14. Okay, so we still have to add or subtract. So again, I have to stack these two equations together. So equation 1. So here's step 2. Continued. Okay, so here's equation 1 again. 10x plus 4y equals negative 1. And then I have 16x minus 4y equals 14. And then, like, your elementary school addition or subtraction, you do the total summation line there at the bottom. And then you have to decide, do I add or subtract? Well, you decide by figuring out how am I going to eliminate the y's. I've chosen to eliminate the y's. They have the same coefficient now, except one is positive, one is minus. So if I subtracted both variables, I would have 4 minus negative 4, which wouldn't cancel out the y's. So what I have to do is add the two terms together. 4y plus the minus 4y gives me 0. Okay, so I'm going to be adding. So put a big put a plus sign. There you go. Put a plus sign to indicate that I'm adding. So when I add them, I just go like this. So 10x plus 16x. So these are lined up. Remember that you have to always line up your terms, your x terms, your y terms, and your variable constants. So 10x plus 16x is 26x. And then 4y plus The minus 4y gives me 0, because 4 plus negative 4 is 0. So plus 0 equals negative 1 plus 14 is positive 13. Okay, so the next step is to solve for x. So 26x equals 13. And to solve for x, divide both sides by 26. So 13 divided by 26. That's the same thing as saying 1/2. Okay. So step 3, I should have said here, step 3 is solving for the variable. So step 3, solve for the variable. Okay. What's step 4? Well, step 4, similar to substitution, you have to take this variable and substitute it back. So here, let's just say step 4. Substitute variable to find the other variable. Okay, so what does that look like? Well, you have to take your 1 over 2 and substitute it into any one of the equations that we had back in the beginning. You choose the simpler one. Now, if I did, let's say the first one, so 10x plus 4y equals negative 1. So here I'm going to write 10 times my x is 1/2 plus 4y equals negative 1. So half of 10 is 5. And then there's no more x, so I substitute the x, right? Okay, plus 4y equals negative 1. And then isolate y, so 4y, if I subtract 5 from both sides, I'd have 4y equals negative 6. And it's because negative 1 minus 5 is negative 6. And then if I solve for y, divide both sides of the equation by 4, so negative 6 over 4, or in simplified terms, it would be negative 3 over 2. So there's my y variable. And so the point of intersection, or the solution, is 1/2 for my x and negative 3 over 2 for my y. Okay, and you can verify that with Desmos. So step 5 would be to check algebraically or with Desmos. I don't have enough space here, so I'm going to leave the checking step for you guys to do. But you can check using Desmos or algebraically. So 1/2 and negative 3 over 2 is my solution to this system. Okay, so let's try another one. So what happens if I look at these? So here's my new system. So 4x plus 3y equals 13. 5x minus 4y equals negative 7. If I look at the variables, these are not multiples of each other. 5 is not a multiple of 4, and 4 is not a multiple of 3 for the y variables. So what happens? In this case, you're going to need to multiply both lines. Okay. So I'm going to pick a variable to eliminate. Maybe I'll pick, let's pick y again. So, I mean, these numbers are a little bit smaller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply. I want the same coefficient. So the common multiple between these two numbers is going to be 12. So I can multiply the first equation by 4, and I'll get 12y. And if I can multiply the second equation by 3, I'll get 12y as well. So I'm going to take the first equation, multiply it by 4. Take the second equation, multiply it by 3. So let's do that. So equation number 1. If I multiply it by 4, then 4x becomes 4 times 4, which is 16x. 3 times 4 is 12y equals 13 times 4. So be careful with this one. This is 52. And there's my first equation. My second equation, I'm going to multiply it by 3. So 5 times 3 is 15. So 15x. 4 times 3 is 12. So minus 12y equals negative 7 times 3, which is negative 21. So what I've just done is multiplied both equations, found the common multiple of the coefficients, and so that just by multiplying them by each other, basically. And so now I have the same coefficients, 12 and 12. One's positive, one's negative. So when I do my second step, I have to choose whether do I add my two equations or do I subtract both equations. Well, if I subtract both equations, then I'm going to be saying 12 minus negative 12, which is positive 24. That doesn't work. I want to eliminate y. So what I have to do is add both equations. Okay, add. So if I add them both, I add the, make sure your equations are stacked, so x's are stacked, 12 y's are stacked, the numbers are stacked. 16x plus 15 is 31, so 31x when I add them together. 12 plus negative 12 is 0, right? So now I have a successfully eliminated y. And 52 plus negative 21 is 31, positive 31. Okay, so now y's are gone, right? So it's just if I simplify this, 31x equals 31. And if I solve for x, so the next step is to solve for x. Solving for x means x is 31 divided by 31, which is 1. So there's my x variable. Now the next step is to substitute this back in to one of the equations. So if I pick the first one, for example, let's say 4 times 1, which is my x value, plus 3y equals 13. I just have to solve for y. Okay, so 4 times 1 is 4, plus 3y equals 13. If I subtract, now there's no more x's, right? Now if I subtract 4 from both sides, I'll get 3y equals 13 minus 4. And then if I do the simplifying, 3y equals 13 minus 4, which is 9. And then if I divide both sides by 3, I'll get my answer for y. So y equals 9 over 3, which is 3. So there's my y variable. And so the point of intersection is 1, 3. And don't forget, your last step is to check your equation. So always check. So I have some space here. Let's check. So if I put, if I took the first equation, 4 times 1 plus 3 times 3 equals 13. Let's see, 4 times 1 is 4, plus 3 times 3 is 9, and 4 plus 9 is 13. So 13 equals 13. Left side equals the right side. Good. And if I check the other equation, 5x, so 5 times 1 minus 4 times y, so 4 times 3 equals negative 7. 5 times 1 is 5. 4 times 3 is 12. And there's my right side. 5 minus 12 is negative 7, which is equal to the right side. Left side equals right side. So I've just checked. My answer is correct. Okay, so those are 2 examples on solving with elimination. And that ends this video.